Hello and welcome. Today we would talk about The Moon and the Yew Tree by Sylvia Plath. Now let me first talk about the title of this poem. Yew trees are supposed to be mystical. They are symbols of resurrection, and that's because they are able to produce fresh shoots from dead wood. So very often you would find very odd shapes of the trunk of the yew tree, and that makes them slightly spooky in their appearance, but in general they are, they live for up to 900 years. They're ancient, and so there is some mysticism associated with them, and you find them in churches and in graveyards. So when Sylvia Plath writes about the moon and the yew tree, we have to take the yew tree with its symbolism. Now, if you know a little bit about Plath's life, you would also know that Plath had unfortunately committed suicide in 1963. This poem was written in 1961, and this was actually to overcome her writer's block, and it was on the advice of her husband Ted Hughes, who used to write nature poetry himself, and he had suggested her to look at the setting around her and write about it. Okay, and a little bit more about what was going on at that point. In 1961, they were living in Devon. This is a quiet town, and they had moved away from the US, and this was 1961, and by 1962 their marriage had already fallen apart. Okay, so Sylvia Plath writes very prolifically towards the very end in her life, and that's when we have most of her autobiographical poems, Daddy, come afterwards. This particular poem predates the those autobiographical poems. So this one is also autobiographical, but this isn't as much of an autobiographical work as Daddy would be. Okay, so the style of this poem is 7-line stanzas with no particular rhyme scheme, and it is notable for its extensive use of symbolism. It is also layered and cryptic. Okay, so this is the poem. This is the light of the mind, cold and planetary. The trees of the mind are black, the light is blue. The grasses unload their griefs at my feet as if I were God, prickling my ankles and murmuring of their humility. Fumy spiritus inhabit this place, separated from my house by a row of headstones. I simply cannot see where there is to get to. Now, just little bit about the symbolism. Here the moon is the mother, the yew tree represents the father, and this poem is a bit autobiographical, but you can see that there are satirical elements in this poem as well. And Sylvia Plath talks about religion. She, the setting is that of a church, that of a graveyard. She talks about church bells, she talks about resurrection. So the poem also talks about a lot of spiritual dilemmas in life. Okay, so now let's do this poem line by line. This is the light of the mind, cold and planetary. The trees of the mind are black, the light is blue. So clearly it's not a happy place. Blue light is not supposed to be a very illuminating light. It's supposed to be gloomy, right? So this is her mindscape. This is how her mind thinks of things. Okay, so this is her mindscape as the poem is written as an exercise. So she's describing the way she sees things. So the light of the mind basically means how she is able to view things around her, which are colored by the way she thinks. Or the way blue light of the moon is, and the moon is also blue, so and the light of the moon is also it's emitting a blue color. So the setting that she creates for you is not a very happy setting. It's bleak, dismal, it's grim, right? And what do we mean by planetary here? The light of the mind, cold and planetary. Planetary is basically related to planets, and planets are, move according to their own conditions, right? They don't, they have their own whims, right? So, and you have no control of them, okay? And she goes on to say that trees of the mind are black. Now, trees appear black to her, and the surrounding light is blue, maybe because the light is blue, everything else, the colors are not seen properly. So the color black creates a direct sense of grief and fear, and the blue light shows that there's a lack of warmth, there's lack of sympathy, etc. Okay, the next two lines: the grasses unload their griefs at my feet, as if I were God, prickling my ankles and murmuring of their humility. Now, the grasses unload their griefs at my feet as if I were God. Now, she is describing herself walking around the churchyard with her bare feet, and she can feel the grass touching her skin. And she imagines that, like, as if she is God and the grass is, human race, and they're all trying to communicate what's happening to them through their ways. By touching her feet, they're kind of unloading their grief to her, right? But clearly she is doing nothing about the blades of grass, right? So this is like a commentary on how God is completely impenetrable. You can't reach out to God, even though no matter how much you try. So you would inevitably be tiny blades of grass, and the God, despite knowing that you're trying to communicate something, they would not do anything about it. The last three lines of the first stanza: "Fumy spiritus mists inhabit this place, separated from my house by a row of headstones. I simply cannot see where there is to get to." Now, fumy could mean angry, but a better meaning could be foggy, eerie, and somewhat mystical air fills this place. And why? Because this is actually a graveyard, and this place is just a few yards away from the poet's home, and a line of headstones or graves actually separates her from the place that she's talking about. And this place is actually cut off from the poet by the row of headstones, and that's the reason she says that she can't see anything beyond this, which means that the headstones are representative of death, right? So she says that she can't see anything beyond these headstones, which basically means that there's no afterlife. She says that death is it. You will not be able to move ahead after death, and so she does not imagine an afterlife. As I said, that this is also a poem that addresses dilemmas of spiritual life, of human life. So she is also talking about, so it's very grim in the way that she says that there's nothing after death. Remember the yew trees in the beginning, they are symbolic of afterlife, right? So when the whole idea that the yew tree is actually symbolic of afterlife, but here she says that there's no afterlife. She does not see anything beyond those gravestones. And so that's how it becomes a commentary on religion as well. So this is the end of the first stanza. Now let's look at the next stanza. Now the actual symbolism of the moon and the yew tree begins. The moon is no door. It has a face in its own right, white as a knuckle and terribly upset. Now this stanza moves on, but I'm not reading the entire stanza. I'm just looking at the first two lines. The moon is a symbol of her mother. As we get to know in the next stanza, we know from the life of Sylvia Plath that her mother, Aurelia Plath, was a single mother. She had lost her husband when her children were very young. In fact, Sylvia was just 8 years old when Aurelia Plath had lost her husband. Her husband also was a lot older to her. She had actually had to give up her prospects of a good career when she had gotten married. So there's an entire subtext to that. But once her husband died, she was the breadwinner. She had to care for both her children, and perhaps she was very busy as a mother. And Sylvia Plath holds back, some of her, or holds on to some of her complaints about her mother. So her mother, had clearly a busy, stressed out life. And much of Plath's poetry seems to be a bit harsh towards her mother. But, when you read more about her, you would also know that she was also very close to her. She would write letters to her mother very often. So, and even after the death of Sylvia Plath, her mother had published the long correspondences with Sylvia Plath. So, so basically what I mean to say that even though she talks about her mother and she seems to be critiquing it, Sylvia Plath, no autobiographical, no scholars of Sylvia Plath have talked about abuse at the hands of the mother. It's just a stressed out, busy mother. And so no parent-child relationship is without its problems, and so it isn't like she was completely bereft of love from her mother. But in this poem, she does talk about being perhaps neglected, okay? So she says, so that's what she says, the moon is no door. So the moon, despite, being the mother, it doesn't let anybody in. She has a face in its own right, which means that she has a life of her own, right? And if you look at, if you closely look at the images of moon, you would see that, moon also seems to have a face of its own, right? It seems to have eyes. It seems to have, it's actually a face. And this is an observation that many kids make, right? So, so the moon is not supposed to make you feel welcome. It is a face of in its own right, meaning that the moon has a life of its own. And she says white as a knuckle and terribly upset. Plath uses, such metaphors very often, especially the color white. If you remember in the poem Daddy, she says that the toe trapped in the shoe is white because it's pale and it does not get any air, it's suffocated, it's basically almost close to death, right? She calls it poor and white. And here she says white as a knuckle, which indicates the relationship is tense and upsetting. And in Tulips, which is another poem of hers, which is another, autobiographical poem, and there she's describing her journey of recovering from an illness in a hospital, and she describes the walls of the hospital as white and sterile. So for her, white color is actually the color of lifelessness, right? So here she says that white as a knuckle and terribly upset. So she does not find that warmth in her mother, okay, and terribly upset. Maybe she's always stressed out. We also understand that the whole idea of the face of the moon is because the moon does appear from many angles as if it has a face. Now let's move on to the next two lines. It drags the sea after it like a dark crime. It is quiet, with an O gap of complete despair. I live here. Now she says that if you look at the moon, it almost feels like, the moon seems to be saying O, right? It seems to be mouthing the letter O, and she says that she resides in this space. Okay. And before that, she says that the gravity of the moon leads to tides, right? It drags the sea after it like a dark crime. And it drags the sea because, and in this case, the sea is completely powerless. It has no control. So moon, despite supposed femininity. It's supposed to be, it's supposed to be demure, it's supposed to be pretty, it's supposed to have all romantic connotations associated with it. It's supposed to be feminine. But she says that, there's a dark side to that moon also, given that because of the moon, the sea has to move around just without its own consent, right? So the sea just is being dragged because of the moon. So this is a very interesting image that she builds for us. So it's a very counterintuitive image of the moon and the tides. Normally you would imagine tides and the moon to be symbols of some kind of romance, but she calls it the almost the dominance of the moon over the sea. So the moon for her is not feminine, and the moon is also a strange face which is angry, and it has a face which has its lips encircled, and it's uttering oh, and this is an image of total despair. And in this despair, it is in this despair that the poet says that she lives. Now we look at the last 3 lines of the second stanza. Twice on Sunday the bells startle the sky, 8 great tongues affirming the resurrection. At the end, they soberly bong out their names. By now we also know that the poem is a commentary on religion, as I had said. And religion here, she says, is somewhat impervious to the actual needs of the people. It's quite opaque, right? Like in the first stanza, we see the figure of the god, moving around without doing anything about people who seem to be communicating their problems. So here, that image of the god is evoked again. Instead, we have this image of the church bell, which is announcing the resurrection of the Christ. And it's like the bells are tongues that trill and affirm that God is there, but they show their own presence. They say they are bonging out their own names. Instead of just calling out for Christ, calling out the name of Christ, they are just bonging out their own names. And you would know that when in settings or in institutions of power, the people who do service to the powerful are constantly forced to assert the fact that they are working for power, right? And power systems actually breed a kind of sycophancy. They breed a kind of an atmosphere of sycophancy. So even though these bells are supposed to be, announcing the name of Christ, but they are also, announcing their own names. They're also calling out their own names, saying that, okay, see, we are doing this service, right? So she's critiquing religion in this way as well. Okay, we look at the next stanza. Now we get the image of the yew tree, right? She has only talked about the moon as of now. She hasn't mentioned the yew tree. Now we come and we talk about the yew tree too. The yew tree points up. It's a Gothic shape. The eyes lift after it and find the moon. Now, what is Gothic? For people who don't know, Gothic is Gothic architecture. It's supposed to be, a very castle-y kind of a architecture. It is also associated with horror. Okay, so the yew tree is the father, and we know that Plath had also written Daddy, although she most probably wrote Daddy in the very last years of her life, but that poem also talks about a difficult relationship with the father. And here too we see that she talks about the yew tree as a representative of her father, but a Gothic presence. And Gothic architecture has connotations of eeriness, supernatural and paranormal, and it's a stock symbol of horror fiction. So here she says that the yew tree has a Gothic shape, and over this Gothic horror-inducing tree, there's a symbol of the father, which is the symbol of the father. There is the moon, which is the symbol of the mother. Okay, and so the yew tree and the moon together represent her childhood also. The next two lines go, the moon is my mother, she's not sweet like Mary. Her blue garments unloose small bats and owls. Now again, she makes a very counterintuitive image of the moon. She says that she would like to believe that her mother is like Mother Mary, but she says she's not sweet like Mary. And Mary in Christianity represents tenderness, love, care, purity, kindness. But she sees none of that in her own mother. She says that tiny bats and owls are, oozing out from her in a way. And again, these are symbols of darkness, despair, horror, right? And it's almost like, she's building this kind of an image about her mother, a very eerie kind of a moon and bats around it, bats and owls around it. Okay, the last three stanza go, this is the last three sentences of the third stanza. She says, how I would like to believe in tenderness, the face of the effigy, gentled by candles, bending on me in particular, its mild eyes. Here she says that she is willing to believe that her mother is loving, as tender as Mother Mary, whose face is softened by the light of the candle, who is bending down towards me in kindness, which is typical of how mothers are supposed to be and in popular literature. But, in the next stanza, she tells us that she has come too far. She's unable to believe in such comforting myths. So she's speaking against the grain about mother, right? So this is the image of the tender Mother Mary, of a tender mother, representative of a mother in popular literature, but she says her mother is none of that. And she would like to believe that her mother is as peaceful, as loving, as caring, as kind as Mother Mary, and she in a way critiques the idea of Mother Mary as well. Now we come to the last stanza. She says, I have fallen a long way, clouds are flowering, blue and mystical over the face of stars. Inside the church, the saints will be all blue, floating on their delicate feet over cold pews, their hands and faces stiffed with holiness. The moon sees nothing of this. She is bald and wild. The message of the yew tree is blackness and silence. Now she says, the first two lines in the stanza, she says, I have come too far. There is little hope to find in church or religion or in Christianity. So she, one by one, she's been debunking the popular myths which surround her. She doesn't find any hope in afterlife. She does not find any hope in religion, in Christianity. No saint brings her happiness, right, or hope. And clouds are covering the light of the stars. They are blue, and here blue is again representative of something mystical, something dark, something airy. She can't see the light of the stars. Okay, I have fallen a long way, clouds are flowering, blue and mystical over the face of the stars. She's not able to see the light. It's all blue, it's all gloomy. Inside the church, the saints will be all blue, floating on their delicate feet over cold pews, their hands and feet stiff with holiness. The saints are all blue. You would, in churches, you would typically see, this kind of tinted glass, and you would see the pictures of saints. And typically these pictures have these dark colors, these primary colors, and they're not supposed to be, pastel shades which emit light. And so she says that they are all blue, right? They are not evoking any, they are not emitting any light. So the saints are blue, meaning that they will not be able to emit light, and the light will fall on the part of the church with all its benches arranged in order. Pew is a bench, okay? So and pew, cold pews, she says, cold benches. So again, she's drawing on the fact that there is a cold air in the church. There's no warmth in there. So the saints are not emitting any warmth. They are not emitting any light also. The saints are sculptures are all there, but they are all stiff with holiness, and stiffness with holiness is again a very brilliant image that she has created, that they're so holy that they don't do anything, right? They're so holy that they're busy in just being holy, in being divine, right? They're stiff in holiness. And the so-called holiness of religion, and she's again she's criticizing the image of the worth of Christianity, the worth of religion in one's life, because it fails to give her any hope, right? Stiff with holiness, and it does nothing for her, it does nothing for people, and they are just performing their act of being benevolent. The last 3 lines: the moon sees nothing of this. She is bald and wild, and the message of the yew tree is blackness and silence. Now, she's not found any hope in Christianity, and she says the moon is the image of the mother who does not have as much attention to give. Bald and white takes it away from femininity, so she is not feminine. Feminine typically is represented by long hair or dark hair, but baldness is definitely not feminine, so she says she's bald and wild. It's unable to spread light, and on the other hand, so she would either she would depend on her mother or the father, right? The mother is the moon, and she says the moon is unpredictable, it's not emitting any light, and on the other hand you have the yew tree, and the yew tree is black, right? It's black and silent, so it's eerie and evil. So both the places she is unable to find solace, right? Not in the yew tree and not in the moon. So the final image is that of isolation, silence and loneliness. She's not able to find hope in either of these two figures. She's not able to find solace with either her mother or her father. Now, just a little bit commentary on the poem now that it's ended. I would say that even though now it's very common for people to talk about childhood neglect, but see, Sylvia Plath is writing in 1961, right? And at this point, it's not very common. And so it's really radical for her time to be so candid about the childhood neglect and be creative about it. And in a way, she takes Hughes' style. And Hughes is, as I told you earlier, was a nature poet. But she weaves in an autobiographical element into the nature poetry. So their style is very distinct, and Sylvia Plath has a distinctive autobiographical style. And much of her work is just inspired by her own life. But apart from autobiographical, a very thick idea that comes through this poem is the inadequacy of religion to allay, to be able to appease human and their condition. So this was the poem The Moon and the Yew Tree. I hope you liked the poem. Please comment, please let me know if you like this, and thank you.